Just a photo album. I find many times people are just not familiar. They kind of think of these things as large industrial sites. But just in terms of coal seam gas, this is what a seismic crew, this is going through a forest in New South Wales. So these are the seismic crews that are determining the shape of the coals. This is the big mess that comes when you drill a coal seam gas well. It's about 1 hectare of occupation, and that goes on for approximately a month, give or take a few weeks, and then the thing picks up and moves away. Would I like it next door to my house? Absolutely not. But then I don't like construction of a high-rise apartment near my hotel room either. But I know it's part of what I endure to get to the end point, which is this is what a coal seam gas well looks like. That's the wellhead. This is the shaft that rotates with the electric motor that pumps the water. And here's what a low-impact coal seam gas well looks like in the outskirts of Sydney. This is one at Camden. The water tanks, which are emptied 2 or 3 times a year, are beneath the surface. This is the footprint. That well will produce the same energy as 85,000 tonnes of coal in its life. Bigger footprints here. This is probably closer to the areas where Ray's more familiar with, and to the west of Queensland, where you're not as tight, you don't have as many neighbours, so you don't have to compress it down, and so it's a slightly larger one. But you see the pump and the run, and that's the footprint of the coal seam gas well. This is the footprint on land, and the top one is what you would see often for people who want to point out the coal seam gas footprint of what it looks like. And this was on broadacre farmland in a drought and very early piece there. So it was done with negotiation with the farmer, who was reasonably happy with that footprint. It's not something we would do in an intensively farmed area. And so when you look at intensively farmed areas, here is a coal seam gas field at the same density of well drilling. And you can see along the roads here, these are wells that have been placed or moved in order to minimise the footprint on the land and minimise the impact with the agricultural activity that's going on at the surface. And keep in mind, at the end of the wells, these little patches here go away, and we remediate back, and so the plough goes over the top of that. But this is an example of where we've progressed to. Footprint here, just moving through, this is a core hole activity going on where they're drilling down to take holes out of the rock. This is in New South Wales, Gunnedah area. This is what it looks like after the rig left, and this is what it looked like 6 months afterwards. And the farmer asked to keep the fence here, and you'll note the grass is slightly greener here because the land was ploughed and sowed and so forth. But we think that's the sort of standard that we as an industry need to work to in terms of remediation and handing back activities to the landholders. And we do that in consultation with them. One of the technologies that's absolutely critical, and one of the reasons we don't try and draw lines on maps, is that technology changes things dramatically. Don't underestimate the ingenuity of engineers and Australian graduates to find new ways to crack old problems. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, let's quarantine all of New South Wales and never go there for petroleum, I probably would have shrugged my shoulders and said, who cares, there's nothing there, forget it, there's no hydrocarbons. I would have quarantined New South Wales. 15 years later, we're here wringing our hands saying, gee, it's all going a bit quick, and how big do we want this activity to be? So that changed in 15 years. Already we know that we can drill, and I've operated coal seam gas wells. I've drilled horizontal wells in coal seam gas wells in Australia that reached 3 kilometres horizontally. Go down 500 to 1,000 metres and go horizontal. So if you want to move the wells around to accommodate what's going on the surface, you can do that in most cases. It depends on the coals and the depth, but it's an activity that you can do. So the new technology is to put not 1 well in the site, but put 6, put 9, and drill horizontally out from under there. So now you've got 3 kilometres one way, you've got a 6 kilometre spread all coming from one site. And that's one option that we can use in areas that are particularly sensitive. Do we do it all the time? No. Is it a part of the technology that's emerging, that's building the capability? Yes, it is. And that's just an example. By the way, if you think that that's impressive, the world record for a horizontal drill is actually 14 kilometres. It's in the Sackler and the oil reserves there. So I'm not sure that that could work in coal, but when you draw lines on maps about where you can and can't have coal seam gas activity, keep in mind at 3, maybe up to 14 kilometres away, you can use one of those wellheads I showed you to drill and access the resource with an 8-inch diameter borehole. This one a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's about the coexistence of agriculture and petroleum industry. So I looked at Queensland, I looked at New South Wales and looked at Texas. Interestingly, both Queensland and New South Wales are bigger than Texas. Gross farm product is comparable. They are both, all three are engine rooms for their nations of agricultural activity and very comparable. The fundamental difference is that there are 249 gas wells in New South Wales and 218,000 onshore in Texas. Now you would think that if there was a fundamental bust between working with communities and agriculture, of aquifers, of fracking and so forth, after doing this and Texas has been doing this for 146 years and have 218,000 wells, that we would have seen a problem. I mean, I can debate with you about aquifer impacts and fracking chemicals and so forth, but you would think after 218,000 wells, someone would have found an issue that would render agricultural gas production unworkable in that environment, and we're not seeing that in Texas. So finally, the social issues, they're no surprise. Land access and rights, we're working through that using technology and negotiations with landowners. Water utilisation, you've heard Peter talk about that. We think we are being environmentally responsible, and the bar is always moving up, and working with social and communities to get the infrastructure right. It's a huge challenge for councils. I'm really sympathetic to Ray as a mayor of councils which really need to be, that are challenged by the growth and their infrastructure that needs to be in place. It's a huge job, and I take my hat off to the councils that are engaged in that. And finally, community engagement. Social media active movements are very different to where they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. And anybody who thinks that this is just a coal seam gas issue, I think doesn't understand just the connectivity that's going on with activism and so forth. Look how quickly Occupy Wall Street rolled around the world. Occupy Sydney and then Brisbane and Melbourne all rolled out very, very quickly. Based on this activist roles. You saw in the newspaper just the last day or so ago the funding that is now international, that there is a plan from Greenpeace of millions and millions of dollars financed from overseas to address coal exports from Australia. And so these are people that don't necessarily have a footprint in Australia or the Australian community, but are trying to move the dial on what we do with our resources here. And it's a very interesting read, but I think a key signal of the sophistication of the activist movement, the sophistication of those who are pushing a particular wheelbarrow and a concern that they have. What do we do about that? Well, we provide the facts, we stay centred, we try to be honest and open as possible as we can and keep the dialogue going. So in conclusion, coal seam gas really is important for Australia. It is appropriate for a 21st century, and the community must and will share in the benefits from that. Thank you.